going to try to get started. I know we want to keep to a schedule, so I know that everyone has been sitting at these tables for a really long time and probably really interested in grabbing some snacks and coffees out in the second room. But if we could move back in, sit down, we've got a really interesting panel to talk about congressional decision making. It's wonderful to come on the heels of Congressman Davis, who just talked a bit about his perspective on the Farm Bill and other areas in which Congress can make decisions that will impact the organic sector. And coming up next after we're done, Congresswoman Del Bene is going to give her perspective. So what better sort of interlude than to have staffers, former staffers, lobbyists, political consultants to talk about congressional decision making, working across the aisle, working across the House and the Senate to really move policy forward across the board, and in particular for the organic sector. My name is Marnie Carlin. I am Vice President of Government Affairs and General Counsel for the OTA, and I spent about 4 years on the Hill working for a Senate committee. So I have some perspective on this, but really much more interesting is the perspective of my panelists. And I'm going to open us up to questions really quickly because it's really great to hear their thoughts on how we can move forward. I've got Keith Jones next to me. He works for Congressman Colin Peterson on the House Agriculture Committee. And I'm not going to read his whole biography, but suffice to say he's been working in the organic sector for quite a long time, including a pretty significant stint over at USDA and OP. Yeah, absolutely. Knows as much about organic policymaking here in this town as anyone I know. Next to Keith is Peggy Benzel, and Peggy is a partner at the Podesta Group. She does a variety of political consulting for a variety of clients, and in particular, she's been working with us for a few years now on a whole suite of organic priorities in the Farm Bill, as well as in other vehicles on the Hill, and also some agency work, and has been incredibly helpful to us as we consider navigating those folks who maybe aren't historical supporters of organic, but really we have an opportunity to develop them, to educate them about organic, and create new champions. And then to her left is Julian Baer, and Julian works for Senator Pat Roberts on the Senate Agriculture Committee. He's the chairman. Senator Roberts is the chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee. In his prior life, Julian also worked for Senator Cochran on the Ag Committee, and has also a stint in ag law and policy in this town. And he, too, knows the ins and outs of Farm Bill and Farm Bill Conference just as well as anyone, and will bring us a great perspective. And I guess I want to open it up. I'll ask a quick question, but then we're going to open it up to the audience with mics through the room to ask questions of these folks. But I want to just start by asking if they can give us a few ideas of key lessons learned from the Farm Bill process, the process that took, more years than maybe we thought it would. Just generally lessons about the Farm Bill, its process, specific to organic, how you could work across the aisle and between House and Senate to really accomplish the goals of the greater agricultural economy.
Well, I first of all want to thank you, Marnie, for the invitation being here, and it looks like a marvelous conference. I am one of the staffers that on the minority side that work on the subcommittee that Mr. Davis is chairing, so I'm interested in what he had to say. I think springboarding off of his comments, the lessons learned of the Farm Bill is that bipartisanship works, and that when you can come together, members and staff with kind of a common vision as to what you want the policy to look like within the fiscal constraints that we have to deal with these days, you can get something done. It may look like, from an outsider's perspective, a very disjointed process, and sometimes at a staff level it looks even more so. But I think the takeaway from the 2014 Farm Bill is that there was an enormous bipartisan effort on behalf of the organic sector, and that paid off in a lot of different ways, plussing up a number of programs, some new programs that we had in place. And so I think my takeaway, the number one takeaway, is that bipartisanship works.
Well, I'll be very short because these are the two gentlemen who did yeoman's work, and congratulations to both of them. But I would say 3 words: patience, persistence, and humility. Watching some of these senior members of Congress be defeated in the first rounds on the Farm Bill, which was a bipartisan product, was heartbreaking, and I know it was gut-wrenching to them, but they came back and took it on again and got it done.
I would like to echo the comments about how happy I am to be here. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to talk with you all. Directly to Marnie's question, I think Peggy mentioned persistence. I think that is incredibly important, and Keith mentioned bipartisanship. I think that's also incredibly important at the staff level and at the member level. I think also one of the lessons to take away is at the stakeholder level, off the Hill, that it's really necessary to have a wide range of groups supporting the bill to get it done. And I think the reason that the Farm Bill finally got through is because the folks in the leadership positions had the desire to get something done, but also were able to bring folks together that wouldn't normally agree on things. And when it finally got to the point where this is something that had to get done, and folks realized it and decided to support it, whether or not they agreed with 100% of things in it, I think that was kind of what kind of got it over the finish line.
Now, I can keep asking questions, but I want you guys to know there's mics in the room, so anyone who has a question, just throw your hand up. I think I would much rather hear what you guys want to talk about than hear what I want to talk about. So are there any questions at the moment? Oh, there's plenty. Okay, we got a couple of mics.
And I use the term probably inaccurately, but from an outsider looking in, what do you think, as legislative specialists, would be the most helpful thing for the organic industry to work on in terms of proposals to legislation?
Well, I think there's a number of things that you could look at over time. I think it's not too early to think about, and Julian's probably going to shoot me for saying this, but it's not too early to think about the next Farm Bill. And so it seems like in this town we just kind of finish up one thing, and then because of the length of time that it's taken to wrestle the problem to the ground, then we have to work on the next go around. The Farm Bill, I think, is a perfect example. What I would encourage you to do is that you've got a wide spectrum bipartisan support. You can talk to a lot of people in terms of members of Congress that you may not have had entrees to talk to before, because you've got processing plants in their district, you've got dairies in their district, you've got a presence that when I first began with organics 25 years ago, we didn't have, and it was like beating your head against the wall to get people to listen. You don't have that problem now, and I would encourage you to take advantage of where the success has brought you to in the political process, and that is talk to people. Talk to people you don't normally talk to. Talk to everybody, because that helps, as Julian said, that helps build the momentum when it's time to really make a process move forward.
Nobody wants to be rejected. And so we all have a tendency to talk to the people that we know are going to receive our message well. But while we have to keep up with those people, those are the people that are already on your side. So I think our challenge continuing to move forward, as Keith said, and develop a broader swath of members of Congress who care about the organic industry, or more precisely, care about what their constituents want. To the degree their constituents and your customers are choosing organic, then we have an avenue to help them care about organic. So finding ways to speak to people who haven't traditionally been fans of organic, I would say, would be one of our key challenges or key opportunities going forward.
I think two things. First, basically what Keith said. I mean, if you look at the number of new folks there are in this Congress as compared to last Congress, and then look at the next Farm Bill, which is a couple Congresses away, there's going to be a significant amount of turnover. So it takes continual communication and education with members of Congress and their staff to continue the momentum that you all have built with the last Farm Bill and have that carry through. And so when folks are new to the Ag Committee and that 2018, 2019, whenever it is, Farm Bill comes up, they're not just hearing from you, but they have a good understanding of what the organic industry means to their state and their district. I think, building on what Peggy said, when you talk to folks that aren't your traditional allies, think about how you present your message, and really think about what is going to appeal to this person that I'm talking to. Some folks in Congress will be just hear organic and think it's the best thing in the world. Other folks, you may need to massage your message a little bit and just talk about the jobs that the organic industry has in that district, or the great thing that it's doing for the local economy. That kind of look at your target audience and cater the message, emphasizing a lot of the wonderful positive aspects that organics has to those folks. And so you might find a little more receptive ears.
I want to follow up on that a little bit, and then in terms of laying the groundwork to the next farm bill, oftentimes I think people think, well, I don't know what to talk to my member of Congress or the staffer about if I don't have a specific ask related to a specific piece of legislation. Can you guys give us some thoughts about, good ways to lay that groundwork in a way that's actually meaningful to the staff and the members, that gets us to where we need to be in advance of 2018, 2019, actually trying to make some legislative changes?
Yeah, Marnie, I would encourage you to view what you do as building relationships. You're obviously selling something. You're selling your view. You're selling the sector. You're selling the industry. But you really want to conduct yourself in a way, I think, particularly with staff, where you're building a relationship over time. Now, staff kind of come and go, and that's just the nature of the beast. But you really, I think, want to take a long-term view as to how you're looking at this, and it is a relationship over time. It's not just a one-time ask. It's making sure that you've got a relationship with a staffer somewhere with your in your member's district where you can pick up the phone and have a conversation. That, I think, is the most or one of the most important things that you can do. That takes a long time to do that sometimes because, as I said, staffers come and go. But you really want to become a known quantity with that office so that when you call and have a concern, and it may be a wide-ranging concern of a regulatory issue, it may be a farm bill ask, but that you've got a conduit into that office and are received in terms of conversation.
It's hard to go after Keith because he says everything perfectly.
Next time you'll start, Julian.
That's right.
But just to build a little bit on that it works the other way too. And so as opposed to building a relationship, or in addition to building a relationship so you have a contact, if you place yourself and position yourself as the go-to person on organics for that staffer, you're going to be the person that they call when they have a question. That most staffers that work on organics work on a myriad of other issues, and so they're not going to have in-depth expertise. And so when they have a question about organics, they're going to call you. And then you're the person that presents the information, and you're their resource. And I think that can be particularly advantageous.
I would just finally add, know your audience, which is there's not one set of talking points that you can use for everyone. So some offices you will go in and can talk about the length of time you've been in the organic business and what you've done to help nurture it and how you've seen it develop. Another audience you may come in, one of the most effective presentations I saw a few years ago was a farmer who had converted from being a conventional to an organic farmer, and he gave a very reasoned explanation in a Republican office that wasn't viewed as pro-organic about why he switched. It was to meet consumer demand, and he believed that he was going to make a better living for his family. But at the same time, his uncle and his brother were still conventional farmers, and this was a choice. And very few people can argue against allowing farmers and consumers to make a choice for themselves.
Hi there, Chris Schreiner with Oregon Tilth. I want to follow up on the comments around the importance of bipartisanship in terms of successful policy making and decisions. And so my question to you all is, from my perspective and Oregon Tilth's perspective, organic is not a partisan and should not be framed as a partisan issue. However, we have kind of this optics and this history of it being understood that way for a lot of people on the Hill. And I think that really rings true when we look at this list of the top 50 congressional districts. And of those, we've got 31 that are Republican districts, 19 that are Democratic. But when you look at the House caucus composition for those 50, you've got 4 of the 21 members represented from the Republican side. So as we engage Republican members, what is your advice to us in terms of trying to overcome this barrier that organic is a partisan issue? How do we kind of get them to change the optics around that?
Julian, it's you.
Yeah, that's me. That's right. Republican in the room. Okay. I think what both Peggy and I mentioned earlier, as far as knowing your audience and emphasizing the aspects of your message that will resonate with those members. Talking about organics as a business will appeal to business-minded Republicans. Talking about the organic program and perhaps changes that you would like to see made that make your life more difficult as an organic business person. Things like that might resonate with someone who's looking at government programs from a point of view of how can we make them more efficient, how can we reduce government involvement. And so you can have an identical principle, and it's all about how you message it, and it'll resonate with two folks that you might think are on very different ends of the political spectrum, and it's how it's presented. I also think that there is, within the organic industry, there's a wide variety of points of view, just like there is within conventional industry. And so I think that those points of view and the credence that they're given also affects how organics is viewed from a Republican point of view.
Microphone.
Testing.
There we
Okay.
go.
Thank you. There are many products that are being sold as organic that are not agricultural in nature. That might be shampoo or lotions or mattresses or other such products. The problem is that many of those products, or most of those products, may have nothing to do with organic. And consumers looking at the ingredients may quickly realize that the word organic for them means nothing. And it diminishes the value of the term organic. Consumers don't understand that certain products are regulated by this agency, but not by anybody else or whatever, or vice versa. If we don't find a way to make the word organic mean something across the board, it's going to hurt organic in the long term. How do we deal with that?
Well, I think, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm not sure there's an easy answer for that one. If there were, someone would already thought of it. But certainly the label is one important thing. I know it doesn't extend perhaps as far as you would like it to be, but education about the organic label so consumers are buying not just on the word organic, but on a label. That's my first reaction, but that's may not take you as far as you need to go.
Well, I think it's an excellent observation. Obviously, organic has now gotten attached to a lot of things beyond agriculture products, and that is a nature of the Organic Foods Production Act. That's what it's designed to regulate. And so, in some cases, you're a victim of your own success in what organic has meant in terms of consumer perception and consumer appetites. I think in terms of any legislative process, you have to pick a priority, and I don't know in terms of where the sector would be in terms of cosmetics or bedding or wherever would be the place to pick the priority. But I think you have to begin to sort out where you're going to work on that problem, how you're going to work on that problem, who's going to be your allies. Legislation is a very strategic process. It involves a lot of conversations. And it may be that you need to begin to have some of those conversations with members of Congress on certain issues, such as just as you've described.
Any other questions so far? I have one that's sort of gonna jump to, I think, one of the things that we've been talking about all day, and you guys have probably been thinking about for, obviously much longer, which is the supply crunch. Of course, the number one priority for so much of our sector is trying to figure out how to address this supply crunch problem where we have, demand just skyrocketing and an inability domestically to meet that through supply. Do you guys have any advice for our members on how to engage with Congress on that issue, looking for policy assistance, especially given where we are in the Farm Bill cycle, with the likelihood of sort of specific agricultural legislation perhaps a little lower than one might hope until 2018, 2019. Any ideas of appropriate avenues or ways to engage so that we can try to get some policy assistance on that issue sooner than the next Farm Bill?
I think, and this ties into what Keith just mentioned in response to the previous question, legislation does take strategy, and when you have a request for legislation, and even if it is mid-cycle, there's always opportunities on an annual basis to move things, but those opportunities are much more narrow out of cycle, and they decrease exponentially if there is not universal support for whatever proposed fix you all are asking for. And so I think there needs to be unified support for whatever it is within the industry and within all the stakeholder groups. And then B, it would need to be non-controversial within Congress. In the Senate, the Republicans don't have a 60+ majority. The House has a number of different sectors within the two caucuses that all are influential. And so I think anything with controversy faces a very difficult road.
So I think there are two buckets of things you would look at, very broadly speaking. One of them is, are there funds to help farmers transition? And in this budget environment, and with Republicans in control of Congress, that's a pretty difficult path to see working in the short term, at least any significant amount of money. The other path is, are there barriers to farmers becoming organic, conventional farmers becoming organic, regulatory barriers, legislative barriers, statutory barriers? Can we identify a suite of things that might be changed that would make it easier for farmers to transition? I think that if we could identify those sorts of things, that would be a potential pathway for success.
Springboarding off of what Peggy said, I would encourage the sector also to look at particularly what USDA can do from an administrative standpoint. Secretary Vilsack has been very passionate about his comments that he has children, he loves them all the same. I can relate to that. Sometimes I think I have too many children. But the point is that if you have children, you love them all the same, but you may love them in different ways. Where I'm going with this is that USDA may have the ability through administrative actions to look at some barriers that are preventing activities that would go on an organic grain operation, say grain storage or things like that. They may have other activities that they could look at. And so I would encourage you to be fairly engaged with USDA in terms of what they can do from an administrative standpoint to make sure that organic, given its kind of entrepreneurial bent, given kind of where it's at in its growth cycle, is not being unfairly kind of prohibited from taking some opportunities that other folks in the sector, just by the very nature of who they are, have access to. So I'd look at it from an administrative standpoint too.
So. I think you kind of touched on my question in the last answer, but it's a little bit more. what role, if any, or what avenue, if any, is there to try to talk to Congress about an increased investment into something that we perceive, and I think the data speaks for itself, that is good for rural America, that's creating jobs, it's good for economic opportunity, but lacks the public investment. Secretary Vilsack was here, and kind of alluded to, and there was a question posed to him, until farmers are, or maybe it was Senator Tester or something, but somebody alluded to, until farmers can receive good research from land-grant universities saying that this is a production system that's viable, then farmers are likely not to convert. But yet that requires a public investment back into agricultural research and information-based research, not from a company only trying to get research into the efficacy of their fertilizer, their pesticide, product-based research, where it's gone, Keith, as you well know, instead of information-based research as it was many years ago. And so what if any, opportunity is there to try to get Congress to realize that this is an investment into America, really, an investment into job creation and a growing sector, versus the temperament right now to say, if you're asking for money, no, the answer is no. Or, we have to cut, we have to do this, we have to do that.
Well, research is a very good word. We like that word. I think Republicans like that word. So I think would be viewed, it would still be difficult in a budget constrained environment, but that's a very different concept than coming forward and asking for money to help farmers transition. I think that's probably a non-starter, but looking at other ways, maybe there's money to be shifted from accounts. I'm not the appropriator here, but that's my first take on it. You may have a different view. What do you think?
I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about education, and when you are in a very tight fiscal environment, there are a plethora of requests for funding, and there are a lot of people encouraging a plethora of cuts in funding, and so when you make that decision as a policy member, as a member of Congress or senator, you weigh what's best for your state, what's best for your district, what's best for the nation. And so communicating and building a relationship with members and their staff and having them understand what the importance of organics to their state, to their district, to the nation, and then that perhaps will make it rise in their priority list when they're making those tough decisions and thinking about what the priorities are on their appropriations request letter. I mean, there's a lot of folks that would not initially associate organics with all the positives that you mentioned, but getting in there and talking to folks about it, educating them about it, I think that could change that.
Plus, I think, not to dominate here, but to the degree you start to make the argument to members of Congress that all people deserve the choice to buy the food they think that is best for them. And so organic shouldn't be a product, and increasingly is not a product for only the elite, as it is sometimes viewed on Capitol Hill. So to the degree you're making arguments like that to members of Congress about helping their constituencies, I mean, you link it back to their constituency over and over.
And Marty, I would just offer this. There's only 2 pots of money for mandatory research funding in the Farm Bill: the Specialty Crop Research Initiative and the Organic Extension and Research Initiative. We got $100 million in OREI this time, which I think should not go unnoticed. So I think what you're talking about is maybe more on the appropriation side with some of the other research funds at USDA. But I think if you look at mandatory money, where Congress has said, USDA, you have this to spend in this way, I think if you look over the 2014 bill, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. And it's not where we need to be. I'm not saying that, okay? But I'm saying you shouldn't discount where we started and where we are at now. So.
In the 2014 Farm Bill, USDA Risk Management Agency was tasked with coming up with crop insurance that works better for organic agriculture. And since then, they've taken several steps that I would argue arbitrarily, without much notice or basis, have actually made the problem much worse. That crop insurance now is a significant disincentive or perhaps even a barrier to organic growers, and particularly to those that might consider becoming organic growers. Is this something that we should be taking up with our members, and what message should we say? How do we present this problem?
I think this may be a parity argument, isn't it? I mean, you're paying into crop insurance as is the conventional industry, and it should work for you in your own way as it works for conventional in their own way. And if regulations are not doing that, then there's a problem. So I think, something along the fundamental fairness.
I think with crop insurance, the wonderful thing about crop insurance is that it appeals to a wide range of folks that are not familiar with agriculture, because you have a producer buy-in, and so you pay into crop insurance, and that the producer, the farmer, has a vested interest. It's a public-private partnership, so it's a broad support across both sides of the aisle. I think not being familiar with the specific actions that RMA has taken to which you're referring, in general, I would encourage you to, anytime you have those sort of issues, bring it up with your member. Bring it to the attention of your member of Congress, with your senator. That's what they're there for, to help you and to represent you.
And Doug, I would also argue, if you do bring it up with your member, if you look at ag policy kind of writ large, we are moving towards a more crop insurance orientation over time. I mean, that really is how I think we're going to deliver the safety net to producers. And I would be really forthright saying, if this is where you guys are going and we're not a part of this, you're going to destroy our sector. And so I think it goes to Peggy's point. There's a fundamental question of where the trajectory of ag policy is going, and is organic going to be considered an integral part of that movement, whatever the trajectory is? Is it going to be considered as an integral node on that movement? I think that's a legitimate argument, and I think you would find that it would resonate with a lot of members.
Matthew?
This question, particularly to you, Keith, but open to hearing other folks as well on this. It's great that we have more funding for competitive grants like OREI. It's wonderful. But as you well know, we have a public research infrastructure that is crumbling. And to have competitive grants, but not to have staff and infrastructure and technicians to actually follow through with those projects is problematic. In Congressman Peterson's state, when the oat breeder Deion Stuthman passed away, no one was rehired. We have one oat breeder, conventional or organic, in the entire United States. One sweet corn breeder in the United States. A handful of really even corn breeders who are releasing new varieties or inbred lines in the U.S. So we have this infrastructure issue, and the infrastructure that's well supported are those that have links to industry because of Bayh-Dole and the need to get patents to fund your programs, or royalty sharing at the university to fund your program. From your policy perspective, I know you've had your ear bent by Steve Etkin, Sly, and myself on Seeds and Breeds around Bayh-Dole. From your perspective, is there something that we can do to address this crumbling infrastructure aspect of our public research? Is it a repeal or a reform of Bayh-Dole? Is it new legislation? And how do we build? I know that's a big movement. How do we start to build that momentum? This is not just an organic issue. This is something we can reach across the aisle, across all forms of agriculture, to work together on. Any advice on how we can start to get that momentum going?
I think you summed it up right at the end. This is not just an organic problem. This is really an agriculture problem writ large, and that is how you deliver research to growers that might not. And this is my term, and so you don't necessarily need to think of it this way, but if you've got a dominant paradigm out there, you're representing a very entrepreneurial sector that says, dominant paradigm's fine, but I want to do something different. then I think it's a question as to how you then have the infrastructure and research to support very entrepreneurial activities that may be going on in the ag sector. And that's what I argue is that we're missing the research that could support entrepreneurship out there. We've got a lot of research that supports the dominant paradigm, which is fine. I'm not saying anything about that. But it seems to me that if you want a vigorous rural economy, you also want research to support folks that are a little quirky and a little different and kind of thinking out of the box, okay? I think that's what we're missing. And I will tell you, I'm just being blunt here, when you talk about seeds and breeds, everybody's eyes just kind of glaze over, okay? You need to talk about, I think, in terms of entrepreneurship, growth, what could be happening, if we had this kind of research, where we could go in terms of, crops like oats and sweet corn and things like that. Here's some things we're missing out on. And I think there are members of Congress, and this is a very long-term project, but I think there are members of Congress, and I've told Atka the same thing, there are members of Congress where if this issue was framed, I think, in a different way, you would have a different response. I'm not saying that everybody would just say, yeah, come on, let's go. But I think it's a framing question as much as it is also giving members what could come from this. And I think that's where we need to go.
Go ahead, Adam.
Thanks. Adam Worthson with Organic Valley. So budget resolution in the House, budget resolution in the Senate, one with instruction for reconciliation. I guess the question, this is a little broader on agriculture. I feel like the microscope on ag is getting tighter. And whether it's this year we go to reconciliation or next year, I'm curious to hear from you guys, what is it in the organic sector we should be thinking about and looking out for if we're going to come to a place where, dare say, we open up a farm bill?
I think you hit on a pretty difficult situation in general terms. So the scrutiny on agriculture is getting tighter, and folks just generally in society are looking more at where their food comes from, how it's produced, paying more attention to that. So you have a society cultural dynamic. You have folks that are taking advantage of that and being very entrepreneurial regarding that. You have, on the other side, a lot of folks who are no longer connected to agriculture on a community level, and so you don't have an understanding from a specific point of view of a farmer, and that food came from a farmer, or that where that food came from. And so you have those folks who are you have the folks who are looking very specifically at budget and at deficit and at economics, and there's not a community connection to agriculture. You have folks that are also on the other side looking very closely at agriculture and where did my food come from, how is it grown, how is it produced, et cetera. And so there's a kind of the universal support that our agriculture has had in the past has narrowed significantly, and folks are being a lot more critical of it. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I think one of the things that put the Farm Bill over the line was folks that all had a vested interest, albeit small in some cases, but all had their piece of a pie, to use a cliche, decided that enough is enough. It's been 3 years. Let's get this done. And so, if we do get into a situation where we quote unquote open up the Farm Bill, you could see a situation where folks all decide, I'm going to protect my piece of the pie and go after ensuring that their part and their interests are preserved, where you could see folks come together and try to preserve a general coalition, and that includes ag and nutrition, conventional and organic ag. I mean, the kind of the whole food agriculture picture. I don't know how that'll shake out. I hope we don't get to that point, but that's just kind of my thoughts on that.
Well, I think, Adam, from Ranking Member Peterson's perspective, opening the farm bill would be a disaster. I mean, he's been on record time and time again on that. I think to Julian's point, if leadership got to that point and said, you know, we really do have to do reconciliation, and there's been some instructions given to us on the House, how that would sort out, I think is unclear at this point, because it's out there. You know, the Republican leadership has put that out, but there's not a lot of fences as to really what this means and that kind of thing. So I guess I think the concept of reconciliation is out there. I don't see any quick movement. Peggy, you may have, I don't know, different perspective.
Laura, I think one last question.
Great, thanks. Hi, you guys. So this is a question, I think, to Keith and Julian, but Peggy, please weigh in as well. Earlier today, we had a member of Congress, and in a response to a question, indicated that on an issue that came up, sort of eruption in social media, sort of pure advocacy versus constituent advocacy, had almost the opposite intended effect in terms of shutting down the ability to listen. So I'm just really interested in your candid view about putting constituent advocacy aside. When pure advocacy, is there ever the time when that moves people beyond their predisposition? Is it about how much noise there is? Does it always sort of fall back and reinforce? Just so what are your views when the sort of general advocacy, issue advocacy outside the constituent comes in the office, whether or not it's an issue that, whatever it is, whether or not it's something that is intended to move you to another place in thinking, or what you might recommend to your bosses?
I think that ties in a little bit with the earlier question from the gentleman regarding how to appeal to Republicans. I can't speak generally for all Republicans, but I can share as far as the folks that I work with and myself. Pure advocacy is troubling sometimes because it's often viewed as not wanting to achieve an outcome if compromise is necessary, just by the very nature. It's a flag in the ground, it's a line in the sand, and that is not how we get things done. Folks that are interested in accomplishing policy objectives understand that you need to compromise, you need to work across the aisle, and there is nothing pure here. Certainly, I personally have a negative reaction to what you would call pure advocacy. I understand that there's a role for that, and everyone is entitled to their own opinion and their own beliefs, but it just really, it depends on what your priorities are. Do you want to work together? Do you want to get something done? Or do you want to be isolated and stand with you when maybe you and 3 or 4 others that think just like you? It's kind of my take on it. And generally, outside of me, I know that there are a number of folks that have a more visceral reaction, and it does have an opposite effect on our side of the aisle.
Yeah, I was on a panel discussion last week about the influence of social media on ag policy, and I said some very injudicious things about social media. The thing that I want to leave with you on that question is that legislation takes space, and when you constrain the space, you push everybody to the polls. You constrain the space for opportunity for dialogue, and that is the fundamental essence of legislation. It is being able to have a dialogue, not a yelling contest. It's being able to have a dialogue. And what I find is that social media moves everybody to the polls. And I think from a policy perspective, that's negative. You know, I'll take the sector back to when we were putting the rule together, 275,603 comments. Pretty much knew where everybody was at. But you got to slog through the comments to figure out what the nuances are. And I think social media is not a good process for sorting out nuances. And in many cases, the beauty about legislation is you figure out where that sweet spot is, where that nuance is, and that's the place you want to go. And you can only go there because social media hasn't covered up my boss or Julian's boss or somebody like that, and we suddenly now can't even have a conversation because, like I said, we're pushed back against the walls, and you just can't do that, folks. I mean, if you want us, if you have any belief that we're useful, you've got to give us some space to be useful in, you know. So.
The flip side of that is, I agree with what they're saying completely, because compromises never reached out where the public is all watching. It's just not. But on the other side of that, social media can be used as a very effective tool to understand perspectives and where people are. Who's leading a debate? Who's driving a discussion? What are they saying? When you can test a message and whether that message is working. So I think to ignore the tool of social media for your own edification would be also a mistake, because it's a very, very powerful way that used to take hundreds of thousands of dollars of research and focus groups. Now we can understand down to the minutia, the 5 people who are talking about this topic who are actually moving the dialogue. Not just talking, but I mean, the people are listening to them and what they're saying. And how do you get to those people to have a fair discussion about your issue?
Well, great. I really appreciate Keith and Peggy and Julian, each of you being here, especially I know things are really busy on the Hill and we had to shuffle some schedules, and we very much appreciate your flexibility. Hope this was interesting to all of you all, and I hope it really informs us as we head to the Hill tomorrow and then throughout the year on how to message, how to talk to our members of Congress, and really develop those relationships that these guys are talking about. Sometimes I think legislation takes time, and it's hard to see that the needle is being moved. But developing those relationships, I think, moves the needle, so that when the opportunity is there for legislation, we've got the right folks to talk to and the right folks answering the phones. So thanks so much. And I think next Angie will come up and introduce our next speaker.